In a broad sense, there are many economic problems. In macroeconomics, you've got issues such as inequality, monopoly power, dealing with externalities, market failure, government failure, and how to distribute resources efficiently. From a bigger macro perspective, the main problems of issues like how to deal with inflation, how to deal with unemployment and recession, and perhaps more recent economic problems, or at least have become more prominent in recent years, is issues such as the environment, how to deal with global warming, and how to deal with a growing population. So the fundamental economic problem is said to be the scarcity of resources. Individuals tend to have unlimited desires and wants, but there's only limited resources. So the first economic problem is trying to deal with this issue of how to deal with scarcity of resources, scarcity of time. And the classical economic response to this problem is to leave it to the free market, to the invisible hand. And so if there are shortages of one good, this tends to push up prices, and the market will create an incentive for a firm to provide the good that is in shortage. But even if we take this free market view, there are still many economic problems arising. The first one is the issue of externalities. What this means is that when you produce or consume a good, there may be costs to other people, but when you're deciding what to do, you don't necessarily take these costs into effect. So for example, if you're deciding how to get to work, the rational choice for yourself may be to drive, because it's relatively cheap and it's more comfortable. However, if everybody takes this decision to drive into the city centre, it creates congestion. And so the social outcome may be quite below the best possible outcome, because we end up spending a lot of time sitting in a traffic jam. So a free market can create these issues of externalities, and this requires a different solution to just leaving it to the market. So for example, an economist may suggest a congestion charge, a tax for driving into a busy city centre at peak times. So this creates a disincentive to drive, and maybe people take alternative forms like walking, cycling, public transport, and this then leads to lower congestion and a greater social efficiency. Now, perhaps the biggest externality of the moment when we look at the world is the issue of pollution and the resulting global warming, which could be very damaging to the future of humanity and the future economy. Because when we're making decisions on what to produce and consume, for many years, the external costs of pollution and higher CO2 emissions have been not priced into the market. So we've been taking decisions that lead to all these external costs, not just that we're facing now, but which we will face increasingly in the future. So this is a real problem, because we're not used to dealing with this kind of existential issue. And also, economics has not been traditionally very good at dealing with the impact on future generations. So there have been some taxes on, say, carbon, and trying to reduce the amount of coal burned in city centres. But the traditional responses have maybe not been enough. And so it's a real problem of how to create the right incentives so that we reduce emissions, reduce pollution, and make sure that the economy is sustainable in the very long term, not just for the next 10 or 20 years, but that we create an environment that will be sustainable for future generations. Another example of an economic problem could be monopoly power. when firms dominate an industry, they're able to increase prices and make profits at the expense of consumers. And this could be a problem because it leads to less choice, higher prices, greater inefficiency. Also, another big problem with a free market is inequality, in that some people who inherit wealth or inherit good circumstances may be able to have a very good living standard, but others working for a monopolist employer or unable to work for whatever reason may have insufficient money to live a decent lifestyle. And this requires some degree of government intervention through progressive taxes, perhaps benefits. But even if you get this response to inequality of government intervention, other economists will say this creates its own problem of how should the government intervene. And the problem could be that the government intervention could create its own issues. So, for example, higher taxes may create disincentives to work. Higher benefits may also create disincentives to work, in that people, it is argued, may choose to remain on benefits. Also, the more government that you have, then there will be bureaucracy costs and maybe poor information. And if governments run industries or run firms, then there may be a lack of profit motive, and so the firm becomes inefficient. So we have this problem. On the one hand, the free market creates these problems of monopoly, inequality, externalities. But there's no easy solution, because even government intervention isn't guaranteed to necessarily make things better. And there's a big debate about the extent to which the government should intervene in the free market. Now, looking at macroeconomics, big problems could involve unemployment, recession, inflation, balance of payments problems, government borrowing. And if you're looking at the past 10, 20 years, the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 was a very serious problem, because it led to high unemployment, big fall in GDP, and a lot of instability. So some economists say the government can intervene in a situation like this. So the Keynesian response tends to be, in a recession, the government could increase spending, borrow more, and help to kickstart the economy back to more normal rates of economic growth. But even this government intervention, some economists may say, has its own problems. They may say that government intervention may cause inflation or higher government borrowing, or it may be difficult to know how much or when the government should intervene. So again, there's the free market problem of a recession, but there's no guarantee that the government intervention will always improve the situation. Another economic problem we're facing at the moment is inflation. There's rising cost-push inflation around the world, with higher price of transport, higher price of oil and gas. And inflation creates problems such as uncertainty and instability. When inflation is high, firms don't tend to want to invest as much. Consumers may hold back on spending. Also, the inflation we're seeing of rising oil prices and rising gas prices, this could lead to lower living standards, because there's no guarantee wages will keep up. And if prices rise more than wages, then people become worse off. So the government may seek to try and gain control of inflation, and typically this is done through monetary policy, where higher interest rates reduce spending. But like most government interventions, there's always a drawback. And if you increase interest rates, you will get lower growth as well. So at the moment, in a period of stagflation, which is high inflation, low growth, it's quite difficult to solve, because you can reduce inflation, but that leads to low growth. So at the moment, if you have high inflation and low growth, it's difficult to solve both at once. So to some extent, you have to kind of grin and bear it and accept there's going to be a worse trade-off.